And when the battle comes, she starts to worry. And she says things like, well, I don't know what I can do. She says things like, well, if I go into the king, he might have me put to death. And she's worrying, and it takes Mordecai to come up to her and say, Esther, what you've got to remember is you are functioning like an orphan. You are not an orphan anymore. That was the old you. That was the way life used to be. That used to be your station in life. Stop functioning like an orphan when you are in the palace of the king and you are the king's beloved queen. I know that the enemy, Haman, has started to fight your people, but you have been given a position and a place and a timing by God so you can do something about it. You are not helpless anymore. You are not an orphan anymore. You are not just beat around by the waves of your circumstance anymore. You have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So stop thinking like an orphan. Stop acting like an orphan. Stop feeling like an orphan. You are not an orphan. You're the queen of the kingdom. Could I say something to the New Testament church right here in Singapore? You are the queen of God's kingdom. You are His bride. He is your husband. You are His particular treasure. You are His rare treasure. He loves you with an undying, everlasting love. Now here's the problem in the book of Esther. Esther has this enemy named Haman. Haman hates her. He hates her people. Haman doesn't want the Jews to survive. Haman is a wicked man. The Bible in the book of Esther says that wicked Haman. He's just a wicked man. He wants all the Jews put to death, and he schemes and he plots and he does everything he can to put God's people to death. And he even dares to lift up his hand because he doesn't realize Esther's destiny. He doesn't realize Esther's power either. And when he lifts up his hand against the people of God, all kind of rolls along in the book, and everything looks like Haman's going to win. Everything looks like Haman is going to succeed. Everything looks like Haman will be victorious, and the people of God will suffer a setback and a huge defeat, and maybe even total destruction and devastation. And all goes well for Haman until he dares to lift his finger against the queen of the kingdom. And it's when Haman messes with the queen of the kingdom that the king gets riled up and he says, no, that's not going to happen. Now, I need you to look at Esther just for a moment, because Esther is a beautiful type of kind of where we are as the church. You see, every time God gets ready to elevate you, He basically will introduce some new enemy to your life. That's what happened with Esther. She got to be queen of the kingdom. That's great. Nice story. Everyone lived happily ever after. Well, not quite. Because when God elevated her to the position of queen in that kingdom, a new enemy, Haman, comes creeping in from the sewers. He decides he's going to lift his hand against Esther. He decides he's going to do all kinds of things against her. And you will not win your enemy, listen to Pastor Raymond, you will not win your battle against your enemy based on your own strength. I don't think for a minute that Queen Esther was physically stronger or bigger than Haman. She didn't win the battle over Haman in her own strength. She won the battle over her enemy based on her relationship with the king. You do not win your battles based on your own strength. You will win your battles based on your relationship with the king. That's how we win our battles. And so Mordecai encourages Esther. It's in Esther 4. Let's read it. Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that you'll escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. You can't just sit around and do nothing, Esther. If you hold your peace at this time, there will enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house, you'll be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther, can you open your eyes and can you see for a moment that God brought you to this place? God put you in this circumstance. God elevated you. And yes, God allowed this enemy to come against you right now because He's orchestrating the events of your life. He's brought you to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that's the word of God to Esther. See, the battle is not over power. who's got the most power, Esther or Haman. Haman would probably win that particular battle. The battle is over knowledge. Who knows the king? Who has access to the king? Who knows their place and their privilege? And I would like to suggest to you that the church in the 21st century, in the last of the last days, really doesn't have a clue who she really is. Esther keeps operating like an orphan. Esther keeps operating in her old lifestyle. She keeps operating with that complex that I'm just little and I'm just small and I can't do much and life has conspired against me. And she gets to the palace and she's still operating under that mentality. It's very obvious from the story that if it hadn't been for Mordecai, who is the preacher in this story, he keeps going to her and saying, Esther, you've got to do this. You've got to rise up. You've got to act. You've got to do this. If it hadn't been for Mordecai, Esther would have continued to function in fear. She would have continued to function in doubt. And here's what I would like to say to you about Esther tonight. You need to realize that the devil is not the second power in the whole scheme of things in God's kingdom. People think strange things. Well, God's up there, and the devil, he's a powerful being too. So God's up there, and the devil's less than God, so the devil's here. And then somewhere down here, well, there's the church, and there's not at all. The church is not a lesser power than the devil. The church is the queen of God's kingdom. Here's how it came down in the book of Esther. Esther's all worried. She's acting like an orphan. She's got this complex from her old life. She's got this complex from all the battles and troubles and trials she's been in. And so when the time comes that she can do something that will deliver hundreds and thousands of people, she's ready to do nothing because she's acting out of fear. And she literally says this to Mordecai. She said, well, if I go into the king, he might not lift the scepter. Because she knew it was in the law of the Medes and the Persians that if the king didn't lift his scepter, then whoever was coming into the room, if he didn't lift his scepter, then that person would die. And so Esther, she's afraid of that. She said, what if I go in and the king's having a bad day? What if I go in and the king's in a grumpy mood? What if I go in and the king doesn't want to see me right now? What if I go in and the king is busy and he doesn't lift the scepter? And Esther almost misses her moment of destiny because she doesn't understand who she is. Because the law of the Medes and the Persians applied to all the peasants. The law of the Medes and the Persians applied to all the servants. The law of the Medes and the Persians applied to all the laborers. And it even applied to all the dukes and nobles and everybody else they had in that society. But the law of the Medes and the Persians relative to the king raising his scepter did not apply to the queen of the kingdom. The queen was the king's bride. The queen was the king's wife. And the queen, the king, you already saw it in this story. He wanted Vashti to come in and she wouldn't do it. The king gave Esther open access to himself. She was the queen of the kingdom, but she was so used to operating as an orphan. She was so used to operating under her privilege. She was so used to operating out of fear that she almost missed her moment of destiny. And she almost let Haman, by default, just operate as the second power in the scheme of things. The devil would love you to let him operate as the supreme power in your life, and he'll let you think God's in control as long as you let him be second. The devil is not second. The Bible tells me that the devil is under the feet of the church because we are in Jesus and the devil is under his feet.